Thank you. Thank you to your colleagues for this invitation. And you cannot imagine how much I'm looking forward to the next 2 hours. I can imagine, Mr. Minister. Thank you for coming once again.
The floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, and to the officials. Minister, we learned at the public inquiry on foreign interference that your cabinet colleague Bill Blair, while he served in your current role as Minister of Public Safety, sat on a CSIS warrant for 54 days. National security officials testified at the inquiry that such a warrant is typically signed off by the minister in only a handful of days. And suspiciously, the target of the warrant was none other than a former Ontario Liberal cabinet minister and key organizer and fundraiser for Justin Trudeau in the GTA. So why did it take 54 days to sign the warrant?
Mr. Chair, through you, Mr. Cooper, that's an interesting question. I was asked a similar question at the public inquiry. I was not the Minister of Public Safety. I have not seen that warrant. I can't speak to the circumstances around that warrant at all. And in fact, I was told by CSIS, and the director is here, that I'm not even allowed to discuss the existence of a particular warrant, although that one, as you know, is already in the public domain. So I'm not in a position to address any of the circumstances around that particular warrant. I wasn't involved at all.
Minister, will you launch a departmental review into what happened as far as this 54-day delay?
I look forward to hearing Justice Ugh's conclusions with respect to this issue. I think the bureaucratic term is it was well ventilated at the public inquiry. The judge may have some...
Aren't you concerned that there was this 54-day delay in your department, slow walking for 54 days, a national security investigation? Doesn't that cause you concern?
I have a lot of confidence in the work done by CSIS and their national security partners. I regularly have briefings on warrants that I'm asked to sign.
CSIS went to the minister's chief of staff after no action was taken on day 13. After the minister's chief of staff was briefed, the minister continued to sit on that warrant for all the way to 54 days. Isn't the real reason that you're unwilling to undertake a departmental review is because you know that Bill Blair and his chief of staff put the partisan interests of the Liberal Party ahead of national security? Isn't that why you're so disinterested?
Absolutely not, Mr. Cooper. You can make up a series of suppositions and allegations here. You have...
Why not undertake a review?
Again, Mr. Cooper, these are amongst the most sensitive intelligence instruments that CSIS and the Public Safety Department have. I've never heard of an internal departmental review with respect to a specific warrant. The department provides me advice with respect to every warrant that I'm asked to sign. And again, I've taken note because I have no information myself.
It's really
Mr.
quite
Chair, Mr. Cooper asked a question.
Yeah.
Chair,
So
point of order.
Maybe the member from Matlock would allow me to answer the question.
Minister, we got a couple things happening here. So here's what I've got. I've got some interrupting, and I'm going to ask Mr. Cooper to afford the minister the opportunity to finish. I've got the minister taking an opportunity to himself provide some remarks, and then I've got a point of order from Mr. Turnbull, which I presume is in relation to what I've just said. And if that's the case, perhaps, Mr. Turnbull, we can just continue unless you feel the need to speak to this more specifically. All right. I paused the clock. Minister, I'm going to turn the floor back over to you, and I'm not even going to start the clock again for just a few seconds to be fair here. Allow you to answer Mr. Cooper's question. There's 2 minutes and 40 seconds remaining once I start the clock. Minister, the floor is yours.
So, Mr. Chair, thank you. And as I said, I have no personal insight into that particular warrant. I've taken note of public comments where Mr. Blair indicated that he signed that very quickly when he himself became aware of that warrant. I think Director Vigneault, the former director of CSIS, also noted. Sorry, Mr. Chair, is there a problem on your left?
Minister, I'll handle the the ongoings. I'm going to
Well,
permit
Chair,
you about five.
Mr. Chair, with
I've-
greatest
I've-
respect, it's my time.
First of all, Mr. Cooper, you don't have the floor. Second of all, I've paused the clock. Minister, in about 10 seconds, if you can wrap that up, please, and then I'm going to start the clock again, to be fair to Mr. Cooper, and allow him the opportunity to continue with his line of questioning. Go ahead, Minister.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I would just draw the committee's attention and Mr. Cooper's attention to public comments that I had noted from former Director Vigneault about his level of comfort in terms of the time that this has taken. But my only insight into that are public comments I've seen. But we look forward, of course, to Justice Hugg's addressing this issue should she decide to do so.
Did Bill Blair, his chief of staff, or anyone in the minister's office tip off the former Ontario Liberal cabinet minister that he was a target of a CSIS warrant?
Again, I congratulate Mr. Cooper on your fishing expedition. I was Minister of Fisheries and Oceans myself. I understand that kind of activity. Again, Mr. Chair, have no insight into that. I would, of course, Mr. Cooper
I would note, Minister, that PMO officials were caught tipping off the member for Don Valley North, or at least he was tipped off, and the only persons briefed were officials within the PMO who had national security clearances. So it's happened before. So I put it to you again, how can you be certain that the former Liberal cabinet minister was not tipped off after a long 54-day delay when you haven't even bothered to undertake a review?
Again, there's no evidence, Mr. Cooper, of what you just alleged around PMO officials tipping off MPs.
Well, then just undertake a review. Why not clear the air and undertake a review? 54 days of delay to protect this Liberal kingpin.
Again, Mr. Cooper, those are your suppositions, and I get that you're doing this so you can have nice clips for social media. It doesn't mean that what you're saying is in fact accurate or real.
Well, it is accurate that there was an unprecedented 54-day delay involving a national security investigation that was slow-walked, that just happened to concern a former Liberal cabinet minister and key organizer and fundraiser for the Prime Minister. Just a coincidence?
What is a coincidence is that you keep making up things, for example, that somebody tipped off this particular individual.
I asked you, do you
Point of
have
order,
any information in
Chair.
that regard? Can you provide the assurance that that didn't
Mr.
happen?
Cooper, I've got a point of order. Ms. O'Connell.
Chair, out of respect of interpreters, it's incredibly difficult to have two people speaking at one time. The member opposite can ask his questions and then allow time for a response, or else we're not going to have interpretation and they'll lose their time altogether. So I think it would suit everyone to allow that respect here.
Colleagues, I would tend to agree with Ms. O'Connell here. We do have to be respectful of the fact that we've got interpreters trying to do work that serves us and the public interest. I have tried to be very fair in pausing the clock here in order to not allow points of order to take away. However, at some point, we're going to have to keep going. Otherwise, the minister is going to have to go back to Montreal and get himself a Schwartz sandwich for lunch. So, Cooper, the floor is yours for 20 seconds.
Minister, again, why not undertake a review?
Mr. Chair, the deputy informs me that there have never been reviews around the particular issue of a specific warrant. There's a well-known process by law in terms of how these warrants are handled. We think that Justice Hugg, who has ventilated this issue in public hearings and perhaps in in-camera hearings, I don't know, would be in the best position to offer views on this. But again, Mr. Chair, I think it's important to note Mr. Cooper made a series of assertions about people potentially tipping off somebody who was the...
Minister,
Okay, thank
you're
you. Thank you,
mischaracterizing what I said,
Mr.
Minister.
Cooper,
You're
you don't-
mischaracterizing
Mr.
what I
Cooper.
said. I asked you whether you could provide
Michael.
assurance that that didn't happen, and you have been unable to provide an answer in that regard.
Okay, Mr. Cooper, you will be respectful of the role that I have to play as the chair of this committee to keep order. I have on 3 occasions this morning paused the clock, which is not common practice, in order to allow you to continue a line of questioning when you yourself have interrupted the minister. Your time was up. I provided the minister with an opportunity to respond, which is why we fought tooth and nail to have him here in the first place. So the clock has run on your opening line of questioning, and I would ask that the next time I open up the microphone to ask you to be respectful of my role as chair, that you do that.
The whole point that now the NDP absolutely wants to ignore and forget about was the changing of the election date. Was it a Liberal idea or an NDP idea to move back the election by a week so it guarantees any defeated Liberal and NDP MPs their pension? Whose idea was it, the Liberals or the NDP?
So again, you're a very clever clip you just got for some post that you may do later. But I think it's important for people to understand that pension entitlement had nothing to do with that decision to move the date. I'm lucky enough, I was elected in 2000, so it certainly wasn't my idea to be concerned about pension entitlement for myself. We think that Diwali is an important moment for a very significant community in Canada. There are municipal elections in the province of Alberta on that date. We worked with Elections Canada on a number of different scenarios of different dates. But as I said, Mr. Duncan, in order to reassure you that the little premise of your question, which you fabricate, wasn't the case, we would welcome this committee's judgment in moving the date and would welcome that when you get to the clause by clause, feel free to work with colleagues if you're so outraged and you want to explain why Diwali or the municipal elections in Alberta aren't important, go ahead. But anytime you move the date, you're going to bump into a problem somewhere.
And here's the thing, Minister, is that it's not about Diwali, because what happened was when you moved it back a week, it then coincided with a territorial election and overlaps into Quebec. What you could have done was move the election earlier if that was truly the reason, and it's not. It's about securing the pensions by giving the election happening a week later. People know that because even just last week we heard when we asked your own officials, why don't you call it earlier, including into the summer? And it was, quote, the sorts of considerations that were made, you wouldn't want to break with summer holidays through Labor Day. That was the reason your officials said it didn't get moved earlier. So, Minister, I'll ask you, you don't want to have an election that coincides through Labor Day. When was the last time that that happened?
I haven't taken note of every election. I remember one.
Let me
you
answer
asked
for
me
you,
a question.
Minister. It was the last election. It was the last election.
Either way,
the Prime Minister called it when it was
Duncan.
opportunistic for him, and now suddenly you
Mr.
forget when
Duncan,
the last election was called.
This is Mr. Cooper. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, you have stated with respect to the clause in the bill that pushes back the date of the next federal election that the reason for that was to avoid a conflict with the holiday. You said that before, you said it at committee, but the date that was selected conflicts with the territorial election in Nunavut. And the chief electoral officer came before this committee and indicated that that would significantly strain electoral resources in Nunavut. So you talked about the holiday being important. I agree it is important. I agree the Alberta municipal elections are important. But do you not think the territorial election in Nunavut is also important? And why is it that of all the dates that were chosen, you chose that specific date?
So, Mr. Chair, Mr. Cooper, I think, identifies again something which I said is an ongoing challenge with a fixed election date. I hope Mr. Cooper in the House of Commons hasn't been using in any of his questions the silly phrase about time being up. Because, Mr. Cooper, you would, of course, want to have an election right now, so you shouldn't be worried about a fixed election date next October. But I'm glad you're turning your attention to that.
In solving this problem, you've created another problem in terms of a date that conflicts with a territorial election, which will have an adverse impact on the territory in terms of conducting two elections on the same date. But, you know, Minister, it does solve one problem, a problem not that Canadians have, but a problem that NDP Liberal politicians have, and that is that soon-to-be defeated NDP and Liberal MPs who would not qualify for their pension will suddenly collect their pension. They're going to pad their pockets. That's what the effect of it would be, is to pad the pockets of soon-to-be defeated NDP Liberal MPs. The fact that you profess ignorance of that fact is only because you've been caught, And the fact that you're willing to back down is, again, because you've been caught. Canadians have realized that that is exactly what you did or tried to do. So I'm going to put the question to you once again, a question you refused to answer when Mr. Duncan asked you. Whose idea was it to pad your pockets? Was it your idea, or was it the leader of the NDP's idea?
So congratulations, Mr. Cooper, on your clip. I hope you can get it up before the end of
Just
the meeting.
answer the question.
In the premise to your question, you had a series of, again, I find it very arrogant, Mr. Chair, that one would say soon to be defeated MPs. I wouldn't purport to decide how the voters in Edmonton, St. Albert will deal with Mr. Cooper in the next election. There's a certain arrogance, I think, from the Conservatives to say that, first of all, their members who would have, in their obsession with the pension focus, have benefited also. The idea that none of them might risk being defeated is the supreme arrogance I find.
Minister, answer the question. Whose idea was it? Was it your idea? Was it the leader of the NDP's idea? I asked you a very straightforward question. Answer the question.
So, Mr. Chair, we have explained when we introduced the bill that we had worked on this bill with the NDP caucus, as in the case it was Mr. Blakey, with respect to an agreement that Mr. Singh and the Prime Minister made. And we have noticed the manufactured indignation from the Conservatives around this issue. I agree with Ms. Barron to perhaps prevent them from dealing with what we think are substantive and positive issues in this.
When you had your behind closed doors secret meeting with the NDP, we see in response that Al Sutherland attended that meeting, but who in the PMO sat in on that meeting with officials in the NDP?
Again, Mr. Chair, it was such a secret meeting at a great pizza place on Metcalfe that we posted it on Twitter. But
referring to the meeting on January 25th, where the chief electoral officer, among others, met with officials in the NDP. And the question we had asked was, who in the PMO, who in your office was at that meeting, if anyone?
There's 15 seconds left.
So, again, Mr. Sutherland addressed that. He was at that meeting. By recollection, I think the meeting took place in my office in the Confederation building. There was nobody from the Prime Minister's office in that meeting. I certainly don't have a recollection of that. I was working with a parliamentarian from another caucus who shared our objective in preparing this legislation, and we were lucky to benefit from the nonpartisan advice of both senior public servants and Elections Canada. There's no mystery. The Conservatives find it shocking that people would work together to try and improve our electoral system. I don't think Canadians find it shocking that parliamentarians would work together to strengthen our democracy as opposed to try and vandalize it like Mr. Cooper would do.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister.